Let me start with thanking our IAPT NSC, our president, our secretary, for giving me this opportunity to talk about uh, a fairly relevant topic, I would say, actually, for all of us. And I mean, this of course, the series was started with Dr. Pavitra, who spoke very well, and which was followed by Dr. Dhanlakshmi and Dr. Vanitha. So I am talking for the East Zone, and so let's move on. So I have structured this talk on three aspects. Okay, so first is to get hold of some basic terminology. Okay, and then I will kind of try to simplify some of the basic facts about the rapid diagnostic test, and finally we'll have some case-based discussion on common rapid diagnostic tests. Now, this is a bit odd, isn't it? We talk a lot about rapid diagnostic tests and use a lot of terminologies, and still we do not have a good comprehension of some of the commonly used statistical terminology. And there are four terms which I'm going to talk about. One is sensitivity. Now think about any population. So there will be some people who will be infected, and in this diagram I have mentioned it as a red, and then the rest of them who are not infected, which are represented by the green. Now let me say that I want to do a test and then I get a sensitivity of 70% or whatever. So what does it mean? Sensitivity basically tells me that among those who have the disease, how many are positive. So as you could see here, all these ones who are green, highlighted in the green, are the ones who are picked up in the by the test. And still the ones who are highlighted by the yellow are missed. So it's the capability of the test to rule out a disease when the test is negative. So always remember, when we talk about sensitivity, remember the short mnemonic SNOUT. Sensitivity negative, it rules out the disease. So it's more for a ruling out, the numbers are more for ruling out any particular disease. Next, let's move on to the other commonly used terminology, which is specificity. Now, specificity is about proportion of people who test negative among those who do not have the disease. Okay, so it's the reverse of our sensitivity if you look at it. And again, it helps us to rule in a disease when the test is positive. So specific, if you remember SPIN, that is to specific positive rule in. So that's all we need to keep in mind. There are two, and those two are very relevant for us as clinicians when we come across a test. But there are two important parameters which are relevant to the patient, because when the patient walks in, he says, "Sir, நீங்க என்ன டெஸ்ட் வேணா கொடுத்துங்க, எனக்கு இருக்கா இல்லையா?" That's what he wants to know. What do you mean if this test is positive? So the positive predictive value of a test. So what it means? So when we do a test, lot of people who are infected or who are having the disease will come back as positive. But please remember, there will be also others who are not infected, they will also come back as positive. So the probability that following a positive test result, an individual has a disease, that is a positive predictive value. The important thing we need to remember is the same test will have different positive predictive values depending upon the prevalence. I mean, the most common pandemic in the pandemic right now, we are having COVID. When we are in the height of the pandemic, rapid antigen COVID test, RTA test, or the RAT, is very useful. Whereas when the same test for predicting the disease, whereas the same test when uh, the prevalence of the disease has gone down is not very useful, and that is what we need to keep in mind when we talk about positive predictive value. So it talks about the likelihood of having a disease when the test is positive, and exactly the reverse is for negative predictive value. Again, it talks about the negative test among those who do not have a disease. Again, the same thing, not everybody with the disease will be picked. There will always be somebody with the disease also will be missed by the test, and that is what a negative predictive value talks about. So basically, to put it down in a nutshell, so this is what I'm just talking about. So whenever the prevalence decreases, the positive predictive value of any test goes down. Okay, so as you could see here, for 1%, the positive predictive value can be as low as 8%, whereas when it goes up to the same test with a prevalence of 50% can go up to 90, whereas the reverse happens with a negative predictive value. So just to keep, to keep it as simplified as possible, when I talk about sensitivity, all I am talking about is the capability of the test to rule out a disease. Okay, specificity is about ruling in a disease. Positive predictive value tells about certainty of disease, and it's only relevant when the prevalence is high. When the prevalence is low, there's no point in talking about positive predictive value, and vice versa. So negative predictive value tells about certainty of no disease, and it's relevant only when the prevalence is low. And that's what we need to keep in mind. Okay, now moving on. Now, when we talk about rapid diagnostic tests itself, there is often a lot of confusion, okay, because we often confuse ourselves between a rapid diagnosis and a rapid diagnostic test. Now, what do we mean by a rapid diagnosis? Now, think about a patient who walks in with breathing difficulty. We get an X-ray, it shows a pneumonia. Okay, we have clinically made a diagnosis of pneumonia, and then checked on X-ray has got a consolidation. So we are happy. So in there also we got a diagnosis within a matter of 30 minutes or so. Or let us say a child walks in with fever, convulsions, and is brought in with fever and convulsions. You think meningitis, we do a lumbar puncture, we get pus, and we know it's a bacterial meningitis. So those are ways. There are various ways of achieving rapid diagnosis. So it basically encompasses any kind of modality which gives us a diagnosis at the earliest. So all we care about here is about coming to the diagnosis. Now that is very different from a rapid diagnostic test in the sense that all this rapid diagnostic test is more about point of care test. That means what we can do in outpatient within a short period of time without lot of equipments and without lot of personnel or resources. So the rapid diagnostic test is only a component of the whole armamentarium of rapid diagnostic investigation which we can do, and I'm going to concentrate only on this particular aspect, which are all also called as point of care tests. So where do we use them? Basically, they are used as a screening in early on or for emergency diagnosis. Most of these tests are either based on antigen or antibody. Now, the common question and the question which we all like to know is why the hell we want to do a rapid diagnostic test? Because they do have their own drawbacks, which we'll talk about in the subsequent slides. Now, conventional microbiological tests like cultures take a long time to get the results. It may take anywhere between 2 days, and something like tuberculosis might take even weeks and months together. So the rapid diagnostic tests are there because they are easy to use. They give us results within a matter of few minutes to couple of hours. Many of them are inexpensive. You don't need a lot of labor, and of course, to perform this test, we don't need very intensive training. Now, keeping that in mind, so whatever tests we come across, we need to classify and put them as a rapid diagnostic test. And in 2010, the World Health Organization came up with a set of criteria for labeling a test as a rapid diagnostic test. This was actually originally meant for diagnosing sexually transmitted diseases in sub-Saharan Africa, but since then it has been applied for all tests which are which come under the category of RDT. Now the A for in the assured criteria is for affordable. These tests have to be affordable. We cannot have a test which costs so much that only 1% or 2% of the whole world can do it. The second and the most important thing is sensitive. They should be capable of ruling out a disease. And if they cannot rule out a disease, no point in having those tests. And we will come across certain diseases like in leptospirosis where they just cannot rule out, and so they are not very useful at all. They should be capable, they should be specific. That means they have to be capable of ruling in when it is positive. You should be capable of ruling in a disease. More importantly, they have to be user friendly. Okay, if it is so difficult and so complicated to use, what's the point in having a test which nobody can ever use it? And they should be rapid and also robust. Okay, so the results should be we should be able to get to the matter of few minutes to maybe maximum a couple of hours. And we should not need a lot of equipments for. In fact, we should not need any equipment at all. It should be simple cartridge or a dipstick or something like that. And we should be able to do it in every place. We cannot have it in only in strict in lab conditions only. We should be able to do it in the periphery everywhere. So this is pretty much what the WHO came up with in 2010 as a assured criteria. Since then, there are a couple of more parameters which have been added on to the assured criteria, that is real-time connectivity. Now, what they have told is, it's not only sufficient if the peripheral healthcare worker does the test, the results should be immediately available to the doctor or any other specialist, healthcare specialist who is sitting somewhere else. So real-time connectivity also has become a component. And the other important thing which has brought in is the ease of specimen collection. Okay, so it should not be very difficult to collect the specimen also. The rest of them pretty much stay the same. So keeping all this in mind, we need to now look at the test which we are going to come across. So always think of the assured or the minimum assured or at least the reassured or the reassured criteria. Now most rapid diagnostic tests, RDTs, are qualitative. Okay, and only but some of them can be made quantitative, semi-quantitative by using readers, but majority of them are qualitative, and most of them use either immunochromatography, which is actually performed is a modification of the lateral flow technique, which we'll discuss in detail about a little while from now. And then, or we can use the augmentation tests, which are either antigen antibody complexes with specific antigen. Now, the ones which we commonly come across would be either the dipsticks or the microfluidics or cassettes, which we use in our operations. Now, the rapid antibody tests obviously are going to look for antibody which is generated in the body in response to any infection, and these tests can detect both IgM and IgG separately. But because we are looking for a body response, they are not good at picking up the illnesses quite early. So the body has to produce a response, and if the body for whatever reason cannot produce a response, or we are in the window period when the antibody response is being produced, these tests are useless. When we think of antigen tests, they are useful in some conditions, and obviously we look for specific antigens, but unless we have a specific antigen which can easily be identified, these tests are not very useful either. It is mainly used for respiratory pathogens like influenza, RSV, and coronaviruses. Now, a little word about the lateral flow immunoassay. This is what everybody uses it. I mean, at least most of these tests use it, and what basically we do. Now, basically, we have a cassette, and the cassette starts with a well or a sample where we a sample pad where we apply the sample. Now, obviously, the sample contains the antigen. Now, next to it, we have a conjugate pad. In the conjugate pad, what basically they have is the antibodies to this antigen, and these antibodies are coated with a dye or a fluorescent or gold. Okay, so they're basically tagged actually. So what happens is and they are spread far wide. When they are spread far and wide, what basically happens is that they don't impart the color. But when they get attached and then they come together to a single line, actually, then we are able to see the color, and that is what basically happens. So we basically put in the sample. The sample by it basically it gets absorbed and then into the conjugate pair and forms the antigen antibody complexes, and through the nitrocellulose membrane it moves up further, and we get to the upper end of the cassette where the test line becomes positive and it shows up a color. That's what basically is used in these tests. And this is a big list of tests which are commonly are available, not necessarily commonly. In fact, many of these tests are not available in India in children, and we will discuss some of these. So basically, we'll have this lateral flow immunochromatographic tests, and then we can have the multiplex molecular tests, which actually are not that easily available in our setup. So let's start with some of the case scenarios. Think of, I mean, we are sitting in the outpatient. Think of a 7-year-old boy who walks in with a high grade fever with chills for about 6 days. We examine them, find that there's no, and according to the history, there is not much of a focus. There's nothing much except fever. Child is complaining of occasional vomiting and loose stools. We look at the child. Child doesn't look very toxic, but he does have a coated tongue. His heart rate was something like 80, but his temperature was 38.5. So obviously there is latent bradycardia. And luckily for us, we did figure out that there is a small tip of a spleen. So, I mean, it looks obvious, isn't it? This child looks like it is an enteric fever. Now, the question is, what do we want to do with it? Do we want to investigate, or do we want to just go ahead and then start on our treatment? Obviously, it makes sense to prove our diagnosis. So, we do want to do some tests. So what are tests which are available? So, can we do a rapid diagnostic test, a rapid test for typhoid? What about blood culture and wait for the results to come back? Why don't we combine both? And the favorite of most of our doctors, the viral test. So let's start with the rapid diagnostic. We are talking about rapid diagnostic test. So we'll talk about the typhoid dot test. So obviously it detects the typhoid IgM again, which means that we need a period before the IgM becomes positive. So usually it's about 3 to 5 days, and we get the results within 1 hour. So it looks wonderful, isn't it? But unfortunately, if you look at the sensitivity, it could be as low as 27%. Okay, so which means this is a very poor test for ruling out typhoid. Of course, if it comes back as positive, it kind of confirms what we already knew or what we already thought, that this is typhoid. So it's not a great test when we are looking for proving the diagnosis. But if it comes positive, we can reassure and then say, yes, fine, I'm on the right track. And then so why don't we start? The other problem with this is it could be positive in malaria, it could be positive in dengue, it could be positive in any other common fever, and even worse, non-typhoid or salmonella can cause positivity, and so on and so forth. So hence, it's not recommended by anybody. Okay, so we want to do it just to say what you already thought clinically. Yes, fine, you got a positivity, so you're in the right track. But beyond that, is of no use. So let's move on to the next test, which everybody does. Okay, fine, viral test. The first and the most important dictum we need to remember is that if you want to do viral test, if you want to look for those antibodies, we need for the O and the H antigens, you need to do it after 7 days. So for this child who has come on day 6, we shouldn't be really thinking of even a viral test, but still people tend to do. And there are two types of tests. One is a slide test, another one is a tube test. The tube test gives immediate results, but totally unreliable and pretty much useless. It's one of the most useless tests we can ever order. The tube tests are good. So the slide test, we could see, as you can see here, blue is basically positive, and the first circle here is the O antigen, so it's blue, so it gives a positive test. The dilution is not very accurate, and these tests are pretty much useless, and still it gets done by a lot of people, and then a lot of children are put on treatment based on these slide tests. So the alternative is to go for a tube test, which is between the two, it's much better. Only problem is when you do it, you need at least 8 to 12 hours of waiting period for the augmentation to occur. Okay, so it takes a lot of time, and again, so as a single test, it's not very useful. So when do we say the titer is positive? Depending upon where you live. Okay, if the O antigen is more than 160, you can say there is active infection, and if the H antigen is more than 160, you can say there is past infection, or maybe the patient is immunized with the typhoid vaccine. So as said before, single test, no clinical relevance. Okay, particularly if you're living in India. Okay, so pretty much useless test. What is relevant is to always look back and then maybe think about it. So you have done a test this child. Yes, still want to stick to doing a viral. Yes, we have done one, then repeat another one after 2 weeks, and then it comes with a fourfold rise. Then we say, yes, fine, this child had typhoid. So yes, it's one of those looking back tests, and definitely not the one which will help you in the acute management or diagnosis. So how do we want to diagnose this? I think we still go back to our clinical judgment, and something which we keep talking about a lot. Actually, Dr. Palni Raman, who is very passionate about it, would vouch for this. Leukopenia with eosinopenia in the hemogram is pretty much helps us. But the gold standard is always a blood culture. If your blood culture is not positive, particularly if somebody is given antibiotic, we should consider doing a bone marrow culture. But without a culture, it is difficult to diagnose. So rapid diagnostic tests are not very much useful in a case of typhoid. So scenario 2, we have got a 10-year-old child walked in with 4 days history of fever. He's got some chills and rigors, and he also complains of headache, some myalgia. Again, you look at him. He looks he's febrile. He looks a bit pale, and we have got a spleen. Clinically, we think this might be a malaria. Okay. So what do we do? So I would really like to know the diagnosis. So the simple thing to do would be to send him for a peripheral smear, except I don't have a technician. So what shall we do? So shall I do an RDT based on HRP2, an RDT based on parasitic lactate dehydrogenase, or a rapid diagnostic test based on aldolase? Now, please remember that microscopy is very useful and is the gold standard for the diagnosis of malaria. Only problem is it does not fulfill the criteria for RDT, because you need a good microscope. Okay. You need, more important than that, you need people who are very well trained, and the trained eyes are very important for making a diagnosis of malaria. Okay. So it may on the peripheral smear. So it's fairly difficult. But please remember, it's probably the most accurate among all the tests we can come across. And in the hands of trained eyes, even as low as 5 to 10 parasites can be picked up, whereas most RDTs cannot pick up anything less than 100 parasites. So they're pretty good. So fine. But the problem is I don't have a pathologist to look for a peripheral. What is my next choices? Shall I move on to the rapid diagnostic test? So what are the possible options? So we have got certain target proteins. The first one of it is the histidine-rich protein 2, or the HRP2. So basically, it is released by the trophocyte and the immature gametocytes in the blood. The thing is, this protein can be present, the antigenemia can be present in the blood even after 2 weeks after chemotherapy. Okay, after we treat also it could be positive. And as said, it has got a low sensitivity for detecting low-level parasitemia. When it is high, it picks up. When it is low, it doesn't. So what about the next one? What about the parasite lactate dehydrogenase? Sorry. That it detects asexual and sexual stages. It detects the LDH in all the 4 species, and can differentiate the LDH of Plasmodium falciparum with the other non-falciparum species, but it cannot differentiate between malaria, ovale, and vivax. And it does generate, the antigen is no longer present in the blood once we treat the child. So it's also a test of a cure for us. And so again, if I want any other better test, a single one which can pick up everything, Plasmodium aldolase is there. So it's obviously the enzyme of the parasitic glycolytic pathway, and it is expressed in the blood stage of Plasmodium falciparum as well as non-falciparum. So it actually acts as the universal antigen for all Plasmodium. So what about the sensitivity? As we have told already, the sensitivity is pretty low, but the specificity is very high. So it is good in ruling in. So when you have a doubt, you are not sure you want to treat. So you want to do this rapid antigen malarial card test, and it comes back positive. You are very happy. You are in the right track and you start treating. But the problem is, it cannot tell you about, most of these tests cannot tell you about which which subtype we are treating. And that is very relevant for us in the treatment. So that is why even after an RDT, we still have to send for peripheral smear, at least somebody else to tell us what is the type of malaria this child is infected from. Okay. So among all the tests which we look at, if you want to look for a proof of cure, LDH is pretty good. Aldolase is good for initial pickup, and HRP2 is mainly for picking up Plasmodium falciparum. Okay. So as I told you already, it does not, just because a child is RDT positive does not mean you should not go ahead and then do a microscopy. You still need the microscopy to find out what species of malaria Plasmodium has affected this child. So given all that, the WHO still recommends the use of malaria card test, okay, because of its high specificity, and they say that it's better than just making a clinical diagnosis of malaria and then treating malaria. Given the amount of widespread resistance to anti-malarials, they have definitely said there is a clear-cut role for rapid diagnostic tests in the diagnosis of malaria, particularly in countries which have got a high prevalence. But that does not mean we forget our microscopy, which is actually the peripheral smear, which is actually the gold standard. Okay. But in places where microscopy is not feasible, it is definitely useful. And to confirm the parasitic clearance on follow, we could use these rapid diagnostic tests with the LDH. Third scenario, so we have got a 6-year-old girl, fever of 3 days, vomiting, abdominal pain. So you look at the child looks totally flush, capillary refill a little bit, about 4 seconds. You try to palpate her abdomen, she screams, and then there is a tender hepatomegaly. So obviously we think this child has got a dengue fever. So what shall we do? So should we go ahead and then order some tests? What tests should we do for diagnosis? Should we do just a NS1? Should I do a dengue IgG and IgM? Or should I do both? So please remember, for the dengue, the NS1 still, the non-structural protein 1 is still a very good target protein for detection, because it can be detected within the first 7 days after the symptoms are start. But please remember, it is not of any use if we are going to check it after 7 days. And positive NS1 test basically says that the child has got dengue infection, but it does not tell us which type of serotype. But luckily for us, we don't need to know the which serotype, because our management across all the treatment is pretty much same. So it is pretty good. And it has got a very good sensitivity and specificity. So this is one of those tests which are rapid diagnostic tests, which has got a lot of relevance in our acute management. And it is, as I said, it's a good test to both rule in and rule out dengue. What about doing IgM? Now, IgM can be positive from anywhere after 5 days till up to 12 weeks, and so does IgG, which can be positive after 2 weeks till and can persist for months to years together. So it does signify positive for past infection. So the best diagnostic, if you want to confirm a diagnosis, the best way to do is to do an NS1, and then along with it, if you get an IgM positive, then we are probably very sure that we have got dengue. So pretty much useful. NS1 is pretty much useful. So one more disease where rapid diagnostic test is useful is dengue. Now scenario 4, we have got a 4-year-old child, 2 days of fever and sore throat, and then you look at it, the child looks febrile, toxic, tender lymph nodes, exudates on tonsils. So you think it is acute tonsillitis. The only problem is we don't know is it bacterial or viral. If it is bacterial, is it group A streptococcus, because we have to treat it to prevent a post streptococcal infection. So what do we want to do? So obviously we can think of doing a streptococcal antigen detection from a throat swab, except it's not widely available, at least with us. So there are 3 types of tests which have been developed so far. One is the latex agglutination assay, which no longer is used in clinical practice. The enzyme immunoassay is used in most places. It's widely available, but again, limited availability in our country. The third option is to go for the optical immunoassay, which are actually accurate but can be more expensive. So very high specificity with this rapid RDTs. So you get again a very good test for ruling in. So positive, I'm happy. I know this is group A step, but negative, it may not be as useful. I may not be 100% certain to rule out. So A negative test does not rule out a group-based tonsillitis. So if negative, we have to always take a culture to confirm our clinical suspicion. But one problem with all this tests is that they do not differentiate between a disease and a carrier state. So that is something we have to keep in mind. So in the absence of a clinical feature, there's no point in taking swabs from throat swabs from everybody and then checking for a streptococcal antigen. So what would be our best option would be that given the lack of the universal availability of the RDT for group A streptococcus, we probably would take a throat swab for culture, which we rarely do. And more important is to starting on a very good dose of amoxicillin, not the usual dose, but a high dose of 40 to 50 milligram per kg per day. And in case we don't have enough access to the culture, then we could think of using the MEC-ISAC score, and then and if it comes positive, then you consider giving the same 10-day course of amoxicillin. Another 8-year-old girl presenting with fever and without focus. So on examination, again a febrile child, mild hepatosplenomegaly, but here we have got a SHAR. We diligently looked into the axilla, into the groin, and then found that this child had a small ulcer in the groin, and then on looking at it, it was a clear-cut SHAR. So we think it is scrub typhus. Now, do we need to do any other test? And if you want to do, what test do we want to do? Is an SHAR just not sufficient enough? Now, if you look at scrub typhus as such, there's a huge lot of number of antigens. Okay, and the problem is there are about 20 or 25 or serotypes of the scrub typhus, and these antigens there's not have a lot of variability. So it's actually difficult to pick up one single antigen for a rapid antigen RDT. So most tests use only the IgM. Again, a huge panel of tests. So we have got indirect tests which look for antibodies or antigen, and then we have the direct tests. So among the indirect tests, the one which has got some relevance would be the immunofluorescence assay and the immunochromatographic test. The one of the commonly done tests, the Wheel-Phillips test, is definitely of no use. I could discuss it maybe at the end of it, but among the direct culture methods, again, qPCR or quantitative real-time PCR is probably the one which is quite useful and is the gold standard as of now. IgM ELISA can be done, but there's a huge amount of false positive. So among the RDTs for scrub typhus, almost every one of them, the sensitivity is poor and so is the specificity. Of course, the companies always claim that their tests are great, but the reality is none of them are good enough. So we cannot use any one of them for making a diagnosis. But if we are kind of stuck and then we have got no other choice, and it could be used, it has some role in screening and definitely not in diagnosis. So then what should I do with it? Okay, so how do I make a diagnosis of scrub typhus? Studies worldwide, I mean, not only in India, everywhere in the world has shown that the single most specific um, diagnostic criteria, if at all, for a scrub typhus is SHAR. So it is a more specific sign with a high specificity of as high as 99%. The only problem is it could have it has a very variable sensitivity. Like in Indian population, the SHARs are not very commonly seen for whatever reason, whereas in some of the Western population, it is very commonly seen. Of course, if you think if you got an SHAR treated with toxin or azithromycin, if we think it is a drug resistant, otherwise doxycycline is still the drug of choice. Another 4-year-old comes in with sudden onset fever, chills, headache, myalgia, abdominal pain, decreased urine output. Okay, here please note the urine output is reduced. Okay, you look at the child, there is congenital suffusion, there is a kind of mild macular rash, and then the child definitely looks jaundiced. Again, looks like it's a leptospirosis. So what shall we do? I want to prove the diagnosis. So should I do a microagglutination assay, or should we do a ELISA, immunofluorescence, PCR? What about any rapid tests, and what about culture? Please remember that MAT or microagglutination assay is a cornerstone for zero diagnosis. It's got a high sensitivity. Only problem is we need blood samples which have to be taken 2 weeks apart. But a single titer, anything more than 1 in 800 is quite useful. What about culture? We can do it either in blood or urine. Only problem is it takes weeks for us to get the results. And the more important problem is they have to be cultured in a biosafety level 3 laboratory, which means most places can't do it. The next can be used by IgM ELISA. Yes, it is probably the most widely used for making a diagnosis. It can be positive after 5 days. Only problem is it is expensive and apparently it is very technically demanding. So again, limited availability. What about PCR? Yes, it can be done in the blood and the CSF in the first 10 days and urine later on. But the problem is you need a huge sample and lots of DNA to get a positive result. So all the conventional tests are not pretty good. Okay, it doesn't make our life easy. So why don't we look for some IgM antibodies? With a single sample, the sensitivity is only about 55 to 60% with any number of tests which we can do, any number of antigens we have tested, whereas specificity is only about 70 to 78%. So if you really want to prove a diagnosis, we can have to take a paired sample which will 2 weeks apart, which would give a sensitivity of 77% and a specificity of 96%. So basically, for the acute management and the diagnosis, RDTs are not useful for strep typhus. But yes, again, if you are lost with ideas and we want to kind of get a track, then we can do it as a screening. So not lot many more, so only 3 more small scenarios. So case number 7, we have got a 12-year-old with a high-grade fever, dry cough for 2 days, and we know that his family has got COVID. Okay, so we know probably this child has got COVID as well. So his febrile throat is congested. There are no exudates and chest looks clear. He's not a snake. So we think it is clear COVID. So what do we want to do? Should we look for an antigen? And the antigen which we look for with an RDT is a spike protein, or should we look for a molecular test, which is a viral RNA? So viral RNA obviously does not come under a rapid diagnostic because we need sophisticated instruments. For rapid diagnostic for COVID, the one which we use is again one of those lateral flow assays. We take either the nasopharyngeal or nasal swabs. Nasopharyngeal swabs are obviously better than nasopharyngeal swabs. Only problem is they are a lot more harder on the patient. Okay, a lot more painful for the patient. But the turnaround time, depending upon the test, can be anywhere between 5 to 30 minutes. They have a very high specificity but low sensitivity. So what we are basically trying to sell is if our rat is positive, okay, for COVID, then this child has got COVID. But if it's negative, we cannot say it does not. The child does not have COVID. Okay, so if the child comes with a negative rat, we need to think of doing a RT-PCR, particularly if the child is symptomatic. Now, think about the number of tests which have come in. I mean, this is actually till June this year. ICMR has so far approved 123 antigen-based rapid diagnostic kits in India. And 26 of these have been revalidated also. So a huge number which is available. And some of them can be expensive, but one of the cheaper ones is which we can do it at home would be the Covishelf, which is probably cost only about 250 rupees and with a turnaround time of 15 minutes. And it's basically targeting symptomatic individuals and immediate contacts for confirmed cases. So given the fact that it is a very painful to take a nasopharyngeal swab, then people have tried to look at what about saliva-based tests. So saliva-based test basically uses the chemiluminescent enzyme immunoassay. But the problem is it's not a true rapid diagnostic test because obviously you could see that you need a very expensive equipment. But it's very useful for mass screening. And again, a lot of tests have been validated, but none of them have been approved yet for our usage. But I said it is useful for mass screening. Multiple samples can be processed together. But the thing is about it, this bringing the need for a costly equipment. So how shall we proceed? So the simple thing is rat positive, treated as a positive, rat negative, go for RT-PCR. But please remember, most children do not have serious symptoms. But what they do is to act as a potential carriers and spread the infection. And in most children, the biggest vulnerable population would be the grandparents, because when parents get ill, it's them who look after. So they actually pose a serious community issue. But whatever it is, we have to rule in or rule out when we encounter or suspect a child with the pediatric COVID. But please remember that there is no role for any antibody testing for diagnosis or to find out our immunity after COVID. So another 10-month-old child comes in with 4 days history of fever, crying during vaccination, first smelling like diaper. On examination, I find that the child is febrile, nothing else is showing up on examination. So we think this could be a UTI. So the question is, how do we want to prove it? So should we do a urine microscopy, urine culture, or a urine microscopy and a culture? What about a urine dipstick or a dipstick with culture? Okay. So microscopy technically is not rapid diagnostic test, because again we need the lab, we need microscope, and so it's not a very useful test. The leukocyte esterase test is one of those tests which can come either with a dipstick. Okay, it is an indirect measure of pyuria, and it's more a rule out test than a rule in test. What about the third option, which is nitrate? Basically, we look for the conversion of nitrate to nitrite. It's a rule-in test in the sense that if the child has a positive nitrite test, it tells us that the child has a UTI. Okay. The only problem is in an infant like ours. Okay, they may not take enough food containing nitrates, particularly fruits actually, and as a result of which it may not come back as a positive, even though the child has a UTI. And the other problem is a lot of gram-positive organisms cause UTI in infants, and these do not cause a nitrate, produce nitrate. Sorry. So looking at the sensitivity and specificity, so which one of them should I use? So if you could look at it from a point of view of picking up, sorry, I think it's moved on. Okay, so from the point of view of ruling in a disease, nitrate is the best, not as shown here. Sorry, my apologies. Nitrate is the best. As you can see that there is this 98% sensitivity specificity, whereas from a point of view of ruling out, you put all three together, and if all three of them are negative, then you can be pretty much certain that the child does not have a urinary tract infection. So negative esterase, negative nitrite, no bacteria or pus cells in urine, the chance of UTI is less than 1% or almost 0%. So, but what we need to remember is whenever a child walks in with a fever, always think of a UTI and always look at the urine examination so that we can prevent urosepsis and pyelonephritis. But to prove our diagnosis, we definitely need a urine culture. And any of the positive RDTs come, initiate treatment, whatever of VHRs. I think the current IAP recommends Cefixime while you wait a urine culture report. So just to the take home messages, rapid diagnostic tests or point of care tests with relevance in resource limited settings, useful in diseases like malaria, COVID and dengue, not so useful in conditions like leptospirosis and scrub typhus. Urine nitrite is highly specific for diagnosis of UTI, whereas combination of all three parameters are highly sensitive for ruling out UTI. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thirumurugan, as usual, presented very nicely.
Thank you, sir.
I think almost covered Hendrick fever and UTI, the viral scenario also, and malaria, dengue, Kurbia beta hemolytic streptococcus, typhus, and COVID, our latest hero, leptospirosis. I think so. Dr. Palliraman is there. Yeah, any comments, Dr. Palliraman, sir?
Palliraman, yes, his comment is hating.
Sir, excellent, particularly the stressed upon mainly the basics of RDT, specificity, sensitivity, positive predictive value, and those are the basic, very essentials before going to the rapid antigen test. It was stressed very nicely, and definitely that has gone through all the revision of the past 2 lectures. Again, very good revision. And as he told, only in 5 conditions RDTs are useful in day-to-day practice. With respect to tropical fevers, only in malaria and dengue, mosquito-borne, Malaria and dengue, they are useful. Other conditions like typhoid, typhus, not useful, as he has clearly told. So only 2 tropical fevers, it is useful. Coming to the other conditions, in the first 48 hours, in an older child, doubtful streptococcal sore throat, whether it is a viral pharyngitis or a bacterial, you are in the Centaur score, McKay's score, not clear cut, you are in a dilemma, it is very useful. Whenever you are in a dilemma, it is useful. Rapid strep test is useful. And in a small babies, in the first 48 hours, UTI, it's very, very useful to rule out urinary tract infection, not to rule in, it is not useful, it is for ruling out, particularly when you combine all the things, it is very 99.8% sensitivity. So these are the 4 tests very useful data practice for malaria, dengue, UTI and rapid strep test. And the last but not the least is the COVID test, which is very useful nowadays, even though sensitivity is only 50%, but it is very useful. It is a wonderful lecture, wonderful, particularly stressed upon the very nice basics. Thank you, Thiru. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
நல்ல தூக்கம் வரும் இன்னைக்கு உனக்கு.
Thank you,
Sir.
Palanidaman.
சார் நீங்க வந்து பார்த்ததே எனக்கு தூக்கம் வரல சார். பிஜி டே மாதிரி ஆயி போச்சு வேற ஒண்ணும் இல்ல. Thank you.
சார் வேற கனவுலயே வந்துட்டு இருப்பாரு நினைக்கிறேன்.
சார் இன்னைக்கும் வந்து
கனவுல மிரட்டுறாளேங்களே, கனவுல அவனையும் சரி திருவனையும் சரி என்னையும் சரி கனவுல மிரட்டுறாள் அவர்தான்.
சார் இன்னைக்குமே நான் சொல்லட்டுமா, நான் பிரிஸ்கிரிப்ஷன் எழுதுறேன்னா எங்க தலைவர் கையில மாட்டிச்சுன்னா ஏதாவது மாட்டிக்க போது நினைச்சு பயந்து எழுதிட்டு சார்.
பழனி
சொல்லுங்க சார்.
இன்னைக்கு நல்லா ராமராஜன் மாதிரி சும்மா ஜம்ப்னு வந்திருக்கீங்க, அதனால திருவுக்கு அப்படியே கடவுள நீங்க தான் இருப்பீங்க. But Thiru, I think it's a wonderful talk, Thiru. Really, I missed it. Actually, என்னன்னா it should have been on a Sunday. இந்த பிராக்டிஸ் டைம்ல நீங்க ஒரு 8 மணி
பிராக்டிஸ் டைம்ல நிறைய பேர் வர முடியாம இருப்பாங்க.
நான் அதான் யோசிச்சேன். It should have been, if it is on a Sunday or a Saturday night, it would have been a different story. I think let the people enjoy the YouTube.
இஸ்மாயில், நீங்க நான் சொன்ன மாதிரி ராமாயணத்துல இருந்து நீங்க கோட் பண்ணிட்டீங்க அந்த
சார் ஸ்க்ரப் டைப்பர்ஸ், regarding ஸ்க்ரப் டைப்பர்ஸ்ல
சொல்லுங்க சார்.
ஆன்டிபாடிஸ் வந்து how much sensitive-ங்க
சார்? அது ஸ்க்ரப் டைப்பர்ஸ் none of the tests are sensitive sir. ஆன்டிபாடிஸும் சரி இதுவும் சரி, பட் ஆனா IgM டிடெக்ஷன் தான் பேசிக்கா.
Scrub typers only, IgM only available, no? That's now.
Ama sir, that's the only one which is useful, sir, practically relevant, sir. So that is the one which we can make for the diagnosis, but as a rapid diagnostic point, other IgM ELISA is useful, but not as a rapid diagnostic test, sir. It's not very accurate.
Therapeutic testing doxycycline is finally the.
Yeah, but somewhat we are getting a positive. I think you can confirm. Sometimes may not get it, sir. That all the cases, suppose yes or no, that yes or getting means that means we can start a doxycycline. Otherwise, therapeutic again is it's not advisable, no.
Sir, illa sir, you sollu correct. What I'm trying to say is, அதாவது we have got card test illa, the card test checking IgM வந்து with ICT, அதாவது the lateral flow assays, they are not useful there. IgM ELISA definitely is the test to do for us for the acute management. So that is why it is definitely recommended, but as a rapid diagnostic test, it is not useful. That's what
Palanidaman always says TLC, DLC is very important for
yes sir, absolutely
starting sir. Doxycycline. Am I correct, Palanidaman?
So along with the clinical picture, definitely that is ஒரு க்ளூ கிடைக்கும் சார். நிறைய அது ஒரு க்ளூ கிடைக்கும் சார் அதுல.
Okay sir, yeah, good,
Right.
super Thiru.
வேற ஒண்ணும் இல்ல சார். இவரு சார் டாக்டர் கணேசன் ஒன்னு கேட்டிருக்காரு about NS1 கார்ட் டெஸ்ட். ஓகே சார், அகைன் திஸ் ஹோல் டாக் இஸ் அபவுட் நம்மளோட பிரைமரி கேர்ல should we think about doing a rapid antigen test or not. So from that point of view, definitely RS1 card test is quite useful, and all of them have got a very high sensitivity and specificity. So definitely we can use for clinical clinical decision making. Definitely it could be used, sir.
So particularly within 3 days of fever, I think NS1
yes sir, definitely sir.
Yeah, definitely useful, yeah.
And particularly when it comes to 4 days, 5 days, or 5 to 6 days, we can go for triple test. That will be இப்படி இருந்தாலும் பாத்துக்கலாம், அப்படி இருந்தாலும் பாத்துக்கலாம். Triple test is.
ஆமா sir, when combined with IgM na, it is very useful. NS1 plus IgM is very good at diagnosis. Thank you, sir. I
Thank
think முடிஞ்சிச்சு சார். அவ்வளவுதான் கேள்வி எதுவும் இல்ல. Thank you.
Okay, Thiru.
Okay,
Thank you, Thiru.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Srinivasan sir, thank you.
Sir, thank you, sir.
Good night, sir.
என்ன பையன் ஒரே சிரிக்கிற
Right, right.
கிண்டலா இருக்குதுப்பா.
சார் அப்படிலாம் ஒண்ணும் இல்ல சார், நீங்க வேற எட்டி பார்த்துட்டு போயிட்டே இருக்கிறீங்க, வரீங்க போறீங்க.
இல்ல நான் முகத்தை காமிச்சிட்டு ரொம்ப இது எக்ஸ்போஷர் பண்ணக்கூடாது. எல்லாம் ப்ராப்பர் எக்ஸ்போஷர் தான்.
Thank you, sir.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.